Welcome to the MLB Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden. Getting ready for opening day. You got a 12-game main slate on FanDuel, 9-game slate over on DraftKings. I'm pumped. I'm ready to go.
I am so freaking excited for baseball season to be back. You and I were kind of talking ahead of time, and my favorite thing about baseball season is like I can prep for podcasts and articles and stuff like days ahead of time because the information and news isn't as fast and furious as NBA. But I love opening day. I wish it was like a national holiday and everyone got to take the day off because opening day is amazing.
You got any hot takes for us as far as like season stuff, like where you expect teams to finish? Any sneaky contenders?
No, I don't think I do. I mean,
It
I'm
seems
like
very straightforward this season.
I'm super high on the Angels, but I think everybody's really high on the Angels this year, so I don't think that's too much of a hot take. But I don't know. I think the Braves claw their way out of the basement with all these young guys coming up. I think they're going to claw their way out of the basement, but no real hot takes.
Yeah, I think like the Braves and Phillies are going to be very competitive as far as like the season goes, and probably push. I don't know. I could see both teams maybe if they make a move, kind of push up maybe a second wild card spot if things kind of shake out in other divisions.
Yeah, that would be nice. I could see the Phillies maybe doing it more than the Braves just because the Braves management can't seem to get out of their own way and they keep on screwing up and getting penalized by by the league office. So hopefully they don't make any more like grave mistakes and, lose more freaking prospects and picks and all this other stuff.
It's very true, but at least the Diamondbacks will trade them some of theirs. So
There we go.
opening day slates. We will be covering both main slates. We'll cover the 3 extra games on FanDuel, but start with Minnesota and Baltimore here. Dylan Bundy and Jake Odorizzi. Definitely an offensive game here to start things off.
Yeah, I think this could end up being a fairly high scoring game. I think Vegas has it at 9.5 right now. I don't necessarily think it's going to go under that. I think actually we might see more runs, probably eclipse close to 11, just because I don't think either one of these pitchers really has anything to scare you off these batters. I mean, Jake Odorizzi, not a very great pitcher, and Dylan Bundy is a very, very volatile guy that if he starts to rely on his fastball a little bit too much, he's going to get in trouble.
Yeah, the twin side definitely interesting. We'll start with these guys, and you mentioned Bundy. Like he's such a boomer bust arm, and he pairs kind of well with these Twins bats. And let's talk Eddie Rosario first because I think that's the thing that stands out the most as far as us in all formats. And Rosario's a guy I just have a ton of interest. I feel like he's underpriced on this slate for this matchup.
Yeah, he really is. He's a guy, I mean, just went bananas against right-handed pitching last season. He had 268 ISO, a freaking 377 Woba, was just outstanding against right-handed pitching. And Bundy's a guy, I mean, he did struggle against right-handed hitters, giving up 33% hard contact. Strikeout rate was pretty high, about 26%. But Rosario is a guy that I really, really like. And I think something that people are going to talk about is the fact that Bundy started to throw his slider a little bit more late last season. And that actually bodes pretty well for Rosario because Rosario actually does hit the slider really, really well. So he's one of my favorite one-off plays from the Twins if you're not going to stack them. I think a twin stack in itself, though, is very, very interesting from tournaments. You could sprinkle in Logan Morrison and, of course, Brian Dozier, and maybe even some Kepler or Jason Castro.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think like if you want to get really crazy, like I don't think like Sano or Buxton are the worst ideas in the world, although I'd much prefer them against left-handed pitching. But just in terms of an ownership play, like in working them into stacks, because I like to rag on Joe Mauer a little bit, but like he's just not a guy you're including in stacks.
Hey, he have a decent spring. I think he had a decent spring, and he wasn't terrible against right-handed pitching. I mean, didn't have a ton of pop, but like still got on base. He had a 386 on base percentage. So like if you're gonna stack and you're expecting someone behind him to maybe knock in a home run, I mean, you get him on base and get a run scored as well. It's not a terrible option, and like he's not super expensive. He's 3,900 over on DraftKings. There's probably better options, but no one's going to play him.
Yeah, it's true. And obviously it is a good ballpark for these lefty bats too.
Yeah, it really is. And I think last I saw, the wind is potentially going to be blowing out about 10 miles per hour, which isn't like huge, but could could change things a little bit. I mentioned Jason Castro. I think if you're trying to get a lower priced catcher option on the slate, he's very, very interesting. He's what, 3K over on DraftKings. What is he on FanDuel?
He's two. Yeah, he's bare min there.
Yeah, he's a guy that I think over on FanDuel, if you're trying to get creative with your stacking, he's someone that you could definitely look at there.
Yep. Yeah. So I think Twins, I mean, majority really are GPP bats. Rosario is definitely playable in all formats. And I don't expect really any type of high ownership on anyone here.
Yeah, I don't really either. And you mentioned Sano. I don't know that I would personally go there. I mean, he did strike out like 37% of the time against righties. Comes into spring. I don't think he had a very good spring training. I know there were rumors he had what did they call it? A generous undercarriage this season because he came in out of shape and obviously had the off season stuff going on too. So I don't know that he's going to be in the right frame of mind, but if you want to sprinkle him in, I guess feel free.
Yeah, he's not like cracking your top 3 or probably even top 5 list of third baseman to use, but
No.
if you're building a ton of lineups, like I don't hate the idea. Move on to the Baltimore side of things here. We get Jake Odorizzi, who's obviously very familiar with pitching in Camden Yards, being a former AL East pitcher. Odorizzi, reverse splits guy, big fly ball pitcher, allows a ton of home runs. Going to face a lot of righty bats here and even a couple lefties, and I'm very intrigued with the upside of Baltimore here.
Yeah, he had a couple. I think he faced the Orioles 4 times last year, and he had a couple good games and then a couple bad games. I think one game he gave up 5 earned runs, and the other one was like 3. I wrote up some of the right-handers in my stacking article, just because like Odorizzi, 41% hard contact to right-handed hitters last season. You mentioned the home run troubles, 2.08 home runs per 9. 45% fly balls. There's a lot to like about the right-handed hitters, and I think it starts with Trey Mancini, who should just mash in the spot. I mean, against right-handed pitching last season, 362 weighted on base percentage, 223 ISO, 344 on base percentage, 23.5% strikeout rate. So you're not necessarily worried about him striking out too much. I think he's one of my favorite options from this game, and on the slate, actually, overall, like one of my favorite first base / outfield options.
Yeah, I like him a ton. Also looking at Jonathan Scope coming off a monster power year. I just feel like Scope's underpriced, and looking at the position, like you have a couple pay up options in like Altuve and Dozier, but Scope at 4,100 on DK just seems kind of like a plug and play for me where he's at in the order in this spot. And I don't mind some of the other options, like Manny Machado is interesting. Had a down first half last year, but I mean, still 38% hard contact against righties. I mean, 261 BABIP. Like he was rather unlucky, and I don't want to start already saying people were rather unlucky last year, but Machado was.
Yeah, I think he was as well. And he's a guy that you don't necessarily worry about striking out that much either. I mean, 17% strikeout rate versus right-handed pitching. Still had a solid power year, 203 ISO. So I do like him. You mentioned Scope. I love him batting. He's projected to bat up, in the 2 hole. So that's a solid spot for him. I don't mind Tim Beckham either. I think Beckham's interesting. He was the guy that I put in my GPP or in my stacking article. He looks like he's good to go for opening day. He does strike out a ton against right-handed pitching, about 30%, but some power, a decent weighted on base percentage. So if you're stacking that, I wrote up like Beckham, Scope, Adam Jones, and Trey Mancini as my stacking options, but I don't mind sprinkling in Manny Machado there as well.
In the Baltimore, I mean, really, the stack that you named off, fairly cheap.
Yeah, they really are. And I think the biggest reason that I liked Adam Jones, I'm trying to go through my notes here, but the pitch mix for Odorizzi is something that Adam Jones matches up really well for. So he's kind of why I singled him out over Machado.
Any back end guys that you're looking at here? Maybe a particular one name?
It depends on if he gets in the lineup. I don't know. There's a couple conflicting projected lineups in here, but if Pedro Alvarez makes it into the lineup, which they're going to need either like Alvarez or Danny Valencia because Mark Trumbo is sidelined to start the season. If Alvarez or Valencia makes it in the lineup, I don't mind either one of those, and you could even get creative with like stacking the back end of that order with like Mancini and Alvarez or Valencia, and I guess Caleb Joseph, if you need a cheap catcher, like he's a terrible hitter, but he did take Odorizzi Yard last season.
As a lot of people did.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I think there's a couple cheap catchers on the FanDuel slate. Like I think those are decent cheap catchers on DK because FanDuel you have like Austin Barnes, and you have like Chris Iannetta against lefties for Behrman over there.
Yeah, and cheap catcher on DraftKings not very attractive. So there's a couple options in tournaments, and that's about it. But Caleb Joseph would be one guy that I would consider if you're looking to kind of punt the position.
Yep. Houston, Texas next here. You got Justin Verlander, Cole Hamels. Two pitchers, notable names here, but one coming off a very good season, one coming off a not very good season. And Cole Hamels gets to face a just lefty mashing Houston team in a decent ballpark. I won't say Houston's or Texas is a top 5 hitters park anymore.
Yeah, not since they did the remodel that got rid of the jet stream or whatever. But like, I was kind of digging in. Like Hamels was not like I don't think he was necessarily as bad as most people would think, but he still didn't have a very great season. And there are, as you mentioned, a lot of lefty mashing bats in this Houston Astros lineup. And I don't think we have to tell people that the Astros are good. They're going to be popular today. They're going to be popular every single day. And if you're building in cash games, I think you're starting your lineups with probably an Astro stack.
Yeah, I think so. Like, he wasn't awful as far as maybe like an outcome wise, but like coming off a lot of career lows, like didn't miss a ton of bats. Was allowing a decent amount of hard contact. I mean, 38% to right-handers last year. I don't know. Like, I just think like he's in that decline now where I think maybe we possibly see like even worse ERA and worse like kind of starts here and there for Hamels.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's 34 years old, so I guess you can kind of start to expect that. I will say, like, he started to mix in some, off-speed stuff to kind of reduce the number of fastballs. Like, he started throwing his cutter and his changeup a little bit more and even some more curveballs. But, yeah, I just don't see him having a good outing here. Like, I'm all in on stacking the crap out of the Astros here.
Yeah, I am too. And, I mean, unless he just becomes some crafty older pitcher, like, I mean, we'll wait and see on that. But I think this slate, we're looking at Houston. I mean, rattling off names here of guys that just pounded lefties last year. I mean, Springer, Bregman, Altuve, Correa. I like Marwin Gonzalez if you want to get a little different. And I don't hate the idea of using Gaddis even in the bottom of the lineup. Like you mentioned, lower catchers on DraftKings. He's only 3,300. There is some power still against lefties for Gaddis, over 200 ISO last year. I don't hate him in GPPs.
Yeah, obviously the top 4 of that lineup, Springer, Bregman, Altuve, Correa, going to be the top options to target here. They're the ones that I wrote up in my stacking article. Each one of them had ISOs over 200 against left-handed pitching last season. Each one of them well over league average as far as like hitting left-handers. Feel free to use any one of those guys. I do think Bregman is very, very interesting at third base. He's a guy that I have a lot of interest in. You mentioned Marwin Gonzalez. If you're wanting to be a little bit different and get away from some of the chalk Astros, I think Marwin Gonzalez is a guy that does go overlooked. He 217 ISO against left-handed pitching last season, 328 on base percentage. Was well above league average against left-handed pitching. So I do like him. And you mentioned Gaddis. He's a solid catcher option. He didn't do a whole lot versus lefties, but he did hit for a decent amount of power against them. So I do like him. And stacking kind of like the Marwin and Gaddis and maybe like Bregman and Springer or something like that. Get a little creative with your stack. You don't necessarily have to straight stack the 1 through 4, whatever.
Yeah, definitely. And especially, I mean, you mentioned Bregman. I like Bregman a lot. And I think he's going to get overlooked just because there are a couple other, guys at third base here.
Yeah, there's a lot of great third base options, and he's a guy that I don't necessarily think gets a ton of look here.
Yeah. Texas side of things, a boomer bust offense. They were much better at home last year. I will say that. I don't have a ton of interest here on opening day. There's always big home run threats, but I just feel like there's so many other options that I don't feel I need to go to Texas to even be contrarian.
Yeah, I don't think you have to either. Like, I don't necessarily think you want to pick on Justin Verlander too much. I mean, he is still a very, very good pitcher. Um, I will say, like, I don't necessarily mind Verlander in tournaments as a pitching option. Like, I don't think anyone's really going to look at him in this spots. He had what I think only one game against Texas last season and just freaking mowed them all down. He put up like 32 DraftKings points, but um, there's six guys in this Texas projected starting lineup with strikeout rates over 22%, and two of them over 35%. So there are a decent amount of strikeouts in this lineup. There's a couple guys that don't strike out a ton, but I think Verlander is definitely in play in tournaments, and I don't really want to use any of these bats. Um, Joey Gallo is a decent, like he's going to strike out a ton, but he does have a ton of pop against right-handed pitching, so he might be the only guy that I would even consider as like a one-off.
Yeah, he would probably be it for me. I think that's it. Like you said, like there are a couple of guys that don't strike out a ton, like your Beltres and Andrus, but outside of that, I mean, 24.3% strikeout rating against righties last year as a team. This is pretty much the same exact team coming back over. I like Verlander here as a pivot off of like a chalky sale here. I think there is some upside. And I don't think a lot of people are going to be gravitating towards Verlander if they're paying up. Like I think Sale's going to be the guy who garnishes a ton of ownership, and then people that are looking to maybe be different are just going to kind of drop down.
Yeah, I don't. I think he's going to be very, very low owned, and like I think there's a realistic chance for him to be one of the top three scoring pitchers on this DraftKings slate. FanDuel, it's a little bit of a different story, but I think especially on DraftKings on their main slate, he's a very, very, very interesting GPP option.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge stretch down the half last year. Like I expect him to kind of bounce back between or be in between the middle of the first and second half last year, just because he was so good for the Houston into the playoffs. But I mean, Verlander's getting up there in age too, but I think he handles here against Texas.
Yeah, his velocity was up in spring training, which was nice to see. And he's also throwing a lot of sliders. And if he gets away from his fastball a little bit more and throws that slider against this Texas team, there isn't a single bat on this Texas team that really scares you against that particular pitch.
Yeah, definitely. Yankees, Blue Jays, Luis Severino, J.A. Happ. Let's talk Severino real quick. Kind of on par with Verlander for me. I prefer Verlander if I am making the pivot over him, but I don't mind Severino here. Jay's offense, I think, is obviously going to be better than last year. They were pretty much a near bottom five offense against right-handed pitching. Healthy Josh Donaldson, possibly a healthy Devin Travis, adding like Granderson, Grichuk, like they still kept some strikeouts in here. Like Granderson and Grichuk do strike out quite a bit, but I think this offense is going to be better. But I kind of like Severino here. 80% of at bats last year were ground balls or strikeouts, which is just an insane amount.
Yeah, it really is. And you mentioned, the Jays being healthy. I did see a report. I can't source it at this point because it just came across my Twitter timeline briefly. Josh Donaldson already dealing with general soreness, which is a little concerning. It's opening day and guys are already dealing with soreness, so maybe they aren't as healthy as we think. But I think Severino, you and I were kind of joking yesterday when we were talking about it. Like he had one really poor outing against the Jays last season and one decent outing against the Jays last season. Dude's got just nasty strikeout stuff. I think he has a ton of strikeout potential against this lineup. Yeah, I mean, he's not a guy you're looking at in cash because obviously you can just lock in Sale there, but tournaments he does also have a decent amount of upside in the spot.
Yeah, like look at the opening day lineup and what potentially is supposed to happen. I mean, 6 of 9 hitters, strikeout rate north of 21% last year. You look at Severino, I mean, just dominant against righties, 30% strikeout rate, 243 WOBA. But even against lefties, I mean, strikeout rate remains the same, 287 WOBA allowed. Has that monster fastball, and just that slider is insane. And you look at the Jays, I mean, 29th against sliders last year.
Yeah, if he relies heavily on that slider, then the Jays could really be in trouble because there's like there's not like a bunch of guys in that lineup that really hit the slider very well. Like I think Donaldson really struggled against it. Like Smoke and Granderson were decent against the pitch. Like Smoke is a little bit scary but like I'm not necessarily afraid of Curtis Granderson at this point. And we're talking about it like Severino doesn't give up very much hard contact. So even in a place like Rogers Center, like don't necessarily think we have to worry about him giving up too many long balls.
Yeah. Before we jump into the Yankees, I mean, is there anyone that you could see as a one-off on Toronto? Like, I like Smoke. I like Smoke and Morales as one-offs, but probably not today.
I mean, Smoke does have the BVP. What is he, 5 for 12 with a pair of homers and 5 RBIs against Severino? And you mentioned Morales; he has 11 homers in 51 games against the Yankees. So there you go.
If you want to use them, go for it. They're not cracking any top 5 lists here. Yankee side of things, obviously going up against Hap. Hap is middle of the road lefty, kind of gets through games. Like he can pitch deep and kind of work around. He's not a guy who's going to miss a ton of bats. Going to face 3 very, very dangerous right-handers and then a couple of guys that aren't bad against lefties towards the end of the lineup. Obviously, no interest in Hap here. I think the Yankees are always going to be an interesting conversation just because of the ownership and hype that they're going to bring in DFS and that modern-day murderers row that everyone's really excited about.
Yeah, I will say there are a few guys that do strike out a decent amount against left-handed pitching in that lineup, with Judge at 31%, Sanchez at 23%, Brandon Drury 25%. That being said, generally speaking, I would say a good tournament move would be to take a cheap pitcher against the Yankees, because if they do bust, you're going to gain a significant edge against the field, because the Yankees most likely will be like one of the highest on stacks on any given night. Not going there with Hap today though. Like I don't want to risk that. So I do have interest in the Yankees bats. Of course, you can start with Stanton, Judge, Sanchez, all 3 great options if you want to use them. Sanchez at a catcher position on DraftKings that's not extremely strong would be one of the better cash game and tournament options. Stanton's basically a freaking lock for a home run almost every single night. I mean, both Stanton and Judge in 9 and 7 career at bats have a home run off of Hap. If you want to use either one, feel free. With no Greg Bird in the lineup, though, Tyler Austin is the guy that I think I have the most interest in. Limited sample size, only 13 at bats against left-handed pitching, posted a 29% strikeout rate, 412 on base percentage, 462 ISO. Like, he's a very, very cheap option. He should be in the lineup, as I said, because Greg Bird is out. He's a great way to get cheap exposure to the Yankees tonight.
Yeah, I definitely don't mind that. I like him here quite a bit. And as far as like other guys, like you mentioned Sanchez, like I think you just like you can plug him in at catcher if you're not, going down and paying price, because catcher and shortstop to me are very similar. They're 2 spots that I kind of want to pay up at, but just because the lower cheap options are kind of not that appealing.
Yeah, for sure. And I skipped over Aaron Hicks. He's another guy that you consider. He did kind of when he had a 202 ISO against left-handed pitching last season, didn't strike out hardly at all, like 17%. He's another cheaper option that you can use to get exposure. Like you could go with like the bottom of the lineup if you go with like Hicks and Austin, and I guess you could sprinkle in Walker or Drury if you're really dying to get exposure to the bottom of that lineup.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm kind of curious to see where Judge and Stanton go as far as ownership here. Obviously, both match lefties, but when you look at Stanton and Judge, like the power is obviously insane, but Stanton's strikeout rate is like basically cut in half of what Judge is.
Yeah, Stanton, 14.7% strikeout rate. Like you can use him in cash and in tournaments and expect like him to just basically not strike out. I mean, like he's either going to get on base or hit a home run at this point.
Yeah, so have fun with the Yankees today. Definitely a good spot for them. Red Sox, Rays, Chris Sale, Chris Archer. We've been hinting at the Chris Sale like cash game guy, top option on the slate. Not worried about the hip with the line drive coming back. I'm not worried at all.
No, I'm not either. This is the proverbial smash spot for Chris Sale today. I mean, this Rays lineup is just, it's so bad. There is 4 guys in that projected lineup with strikeout rates at or above 30% against left-handed pitching. There's 1 guy in that lineup that I'm at least somewhat worried about, and that's Wilson Ramos. But if Wilson Ramos is your best hitter against left-handed pitching, your team is in trouble.
Yeah, they're they're in big trouble. This Rays team was just, I mean, god awful against lefties. Or god awful against Sale last year. He had 66 strikeouts over 40.2 innings pitched against them. Went 4-1. Sale's not a wild arm. Generates a ton of strikeouts. Like you mentioned, I mean, they add a couple new right-handed bats in here this year, or guys that were healthy like Duffy, Gomez, Ramos, and Crone. Only one guy has a WOB over 300 against lefties, going back to last year or since 2015. Sorry, and that's Ramos at 336.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and Tropicana is also one of the better ballparks to pitch in.
Yeah, there's just like, yeah, like I don't think you're gonna get any like complete games from any pitchers today, because I know like teams aren't necessarily wanting to roll out their pitchers for 9 innings on opening day, but like if there was a chance for it to happen, I think it would come from Sale today.
Yeah, I do too. I don't have any interest in race bats. You mentioned there is some Wilson Ramos BVP, and obviously he has the better numbers against left-handers, but I can't pick on my boy there.
Now, like if you're not using Sale, you could maybe use Ramos as a cheap catcher option on DraftKings, but I don't necessarily think you want to go there.
No. Red Sox side things, kind of an interesting side here going up against Chris Archer. Archer's been kind of on and off against the Sox, hasn't posted really strong numbers against this team. It's always kind of looking at like 3 to 4 earned runs per start. I don't like Archer here in this spot. Like I expect this Boston offense to be a lot more entertaining this year, adding Martinez, getting a full year at Devers, a healthy Nunez, and hopefully he stays healthy. Like this is just a tough lineup to get through for Archer.
Yeah, I don't really have any interest in Archer here. Like he got batted around by Boston last season, 5.87 ERA and 3 starts. Gave up like to lefties, he really gave up a ton of hard contact, over 43%. I know it's a solid ballpark, but when you're giving up 43% hard contact, that's still concerning. Does strike out a ton of guys, but I just don't think you're wanting to go there. There's so many better options to look at pitcher today, even in contrarian ways like Verlander and Severino. Like you don't have to take the risk with Archer.
Yeah, I agree. And like even in that 8K range, like I still find a couple more options that are rather more attractive in GPPs and do have some strikeout upside. So, but looking at this Boston team, I don't have a ton of interest. Like they're not high on my list as far as offenses go, but I don't mind them. Mookie Betts has a solid history against Archer. I mean, Archer, obviously, as you mentioned, like he was worse off against lefties, but still gave up some hard contact to right-handers. Home runs maybe kind of developing into a little bit more of a problem for Archer if he continues. And obviously, given the high strikeout pitches, you tend to see higher hard contact. That's kind of been a trend lately. But Betts, like Martinez, I'm fine with him in GPPs. You mentioned Benintendi before the show. Like I think he's an option as well.
Yeah, I don't mind stacking these guys. If you're building a bunch of tournament lineups, you would obviously start with Betts. Benintendi is a fine option. JD Martinez is a solid option. And like you could sprinkle in Bogarts. Like I really wish that they would just change that lineup around and he didn't have freaking Hanley Ramirez batting up in the 3-hole, but I don't mind sprinkling in some of these guys for tournaments.
No, I don't either. And some of the back half guys, like probably Sandy Leon's going to be in the lineup just because he caught Chris Sale last year, like Jackie Bradley, like Devers. I love Devers here, but I don't love Devers today just because there's so many third base options I'd rather use.
Yeah, and you're talking about Sandy Babe Ruth Leone right there.
Man, catchers for Boston this spring training hit like a combined 900.
Yeah, buddy. Him and Blake Sweetheart.
Sweetheart, that's right. No puns yet. No nicknames, no puns yet through a couple of games, so we finally get one here.
Yeah, there we go. I missed my shot on El Toro and El Oso Blanco earlier on.
Angels, A's, next one here, Kendall Graveman versus Garrett Richards. Let's talk about Richards here. Let's talk about that DK price. Basically an SP2 guy, I feel here. Little concern, we were talking about him quite a bit yesterday, just with his spring training being a little bit kind of dwindled down. Like he's tons of talent. It's just been a health thing for him the last few years.
Yeah, he's been like chronically injured, but the dude has some just nasty stuff. Representing Edmond, Oklahoma, got that hometown pride right there. Graduated from my high school, so I have to use him on opening day. Like it's just a rule. I like him in the spot. Like I do have some concerns. Like he only went like 12 innings in spring training, so maybe we might be lucky if he goes 6 against the A's today, but there's 4 guys in that projected lineup with a strikeout rate over 25% against right-handed pitching last season. Decent amount of strikeout upside. He also generates a solid amount of ground balls, which is great, especially with the guys that he has back behind him. He's basically a lock at SP2 for me on DraftKings and over like on a site like Fantasy Draft. So he's really cheap. Probably I would expect 18 to maybe 20 points if he goes deep enough to get a chance at the win. That's solid, but I still think there's a decent amount of strikeout potential in this matchup here.
I do too. I think if he was another $1,000 more expensive, I'd have maybe a little bit more concern. But I think 6,800, he should be able to pay off that price tag. And even if he falls at like 14 to 15 fantasy points, like that's fine at 6,800. He's not going to kill you, especially pairing him with a Sale or Verlander. You mentioned there's just a ton of strikeout upside with this A's team. They're so boom or bust, and they do have a ton of power. But Richards over his career, excellent ground ball rate over 50%, induces a ton of soft contact. I looked into his spring training stuff a little bit more. Obviously 12 and 2/3 innings. He did give up 7 walks, which is a little bit concerning. Part of that obviously probably due to rust. So I'm kind of hoping that he stays that way. Oakland, not entirely a patient team, but they can be at times. So I'm not worried. Like I said, if it was another $1,000 more expensive, I'd be worried. But 6,800, like he should be able to pay that off.
Yeah, he should be completely fine. Like I like the walks is a little concerning, but I still don't necessarily have too much concern there.
Yeah, A's bats, I don't have a ton of interest. I'm going to love the A's this year. I'm probably going to be a big homer on the A's, but I don't really like them here just given the fact that Richards, he just doesn't allow a ton of home runs. Like I don't see a real huge shot. Like, yeah, Olsen has a ton of pop, Chris Davis, but I don't think in this matchup they do.
Yeah, and I mean, there's always a chance, Olsen, jacks a solo shot or something like that. But I mean, he also strikes out a ton. You mentioned Chris Davis. He had a really rough spring. Just there's not a whole lot that I really like here. I mean, you get righty masher Matt Joyce leading off. Woohoo! Yeah, no, not for me today.
No big power bat and Jed Lowry hitting 3 either.
Yeah, this was 138 ISO.
But the Angel side of things definitely interesting here against Kendall Graveman. Graveman, struggled a little bit obviously last year at times. Was a little bit better at home, but struggled a lot against right-handers. Going to face some quality right-handed bats here.
Yeah, there's a few guys in that lineup. One of them you might have heard of. His name's Mike Trout. I think he's decent at baseball. We might have to wait and see. Like I'm not 100% sold on him yet. We're gonna have to take a wait and see.
He's no Ronald Acuna, that's for sure.
That's for darn sure right there. Obviously, he's a great place to start. I loved stacking the Angels last year, and it was kind of weird because there were very few times where, like, when you would be watching the game or you'd be checking like the game cast or whatever, it'd be like very few home runs, but they'd have like 9 runs because they were just BABIPing pitchers to death. I love an Angel stack today. I don't think people are going to really go there, and you can start that off with Trout, Cozart, Upton, Valbuena is someone that I really do have a lot of interest in the spot. Ian Kinsler, if he's in the lineup, potentially leading off, that'd be a place to go. Andrelton Simmons, a very solid option here. And we have Albert Pujols with the BVP, 433 lifetime average against Graveman, 3 homers and 10 RBIs.
Yeah, I like the Angels. I actually don't hate Pujols. Like I was joking around before about him probably like grounding in the 2 double plays and killing your stack, but I don't mind him. You mentioned Upton. I think Upton's really intriguing in GPPs here. I don't find a lot of people go to him as these, second basically outfield for the Angels. You see a lot of people going to Trout if they're paying up. Cozart and Simmons, I think they're excellent cash game guys. I think Cozart's got a little bit more pop, but Simmons is just that guy who's like, whatever he's going to do, he's going to get you like 8 to 12 DK points.
Yeah, and like one of my favorite things to do with that lineup, especially if Kinsler is going to actually play and lead off, you could do like a Cozart, Valbuena, Simmons like 6, 7, 8 stack, and that would be very, very interesting.
Yeah, I definitely like that call, and not really big on ballpark factors here. Like I know Oakland's obviously a big statement, but I don't really care.
Yeah, I don't either. Like you can still hit homers in bad ballparks, and like you still have Mike Trout who hits a lot of homers and has a lot of power. Justin Upton has a lot of power versus right-handed pitching. Valbuena a lot of power against right-handed pitching. So, and I should mention Valbuena 2,700 on DraftKings.
Yeah, first and third base there.
Yeah, that's very, very appealing, even as like a one-off.
Yeah. Milwaukee, San Diego next one here. Clayton Richard versus Chase Anderson. Milwaukee, debuting some new names here. You got Lorenzo Cain, Christian Yelich. It's weird. Like I kind of didn't mind stacking them, but I think the way their lineup is going to break, it's kind of going to be a little bit weird. Like you're going to get Yelich and Shaw kind of breaking up what would be a stack. So I think Brewers are going to be a one-off team for me. I know it's tough on right-handed power. And you look at Richard though. I mean, just 377 WOBA to righties last year. That's the second highest on the slate compared to Homer Bailey. Ton of hard contact, still a lot of home runs. I don't know. I like him even though he's a ground ball pitcher.
Yeah, like I think before some of these other pitchers got announced, like I think he was going to be a guy that might have been a little popular because the Brewers did kind of struggle versus lefties last season. They struck out like 26% of the time. Were not a very good offense. But I mean, they did add some guys. You mentioned like Lorenzo Cain, Yelich, and like Yelich and Shaw are going to be like batting 2 and 4, both left-handers. Does kind of mess things up a little bit, but you can still stack that team if you really wanted to and go with like Cain, Braun, Santana, Manny Pineapple in there as well, and just kind of skip the lefties. I don't necessarily think that's a terrible way to go in tournaments.
No, I don't either. And, you mentioned Pena. I think he's another cheap catcher you can look at. I'm curious just to kind of see what this lineup actually does look like if that's the case, because there are some cheap back end options. Like, if you need a cheap shortstop, I don't hate Arcia. Domingo Santana and Braun have a ton of pop against lefties. Like Braun's, let me find Braun here. His hard contact against lefties was 47% last year.
Yeah, that's insane. And even Santana, almost 44% against lefties, 218 ISO. You mentioned Braun, 253 ISO. Braun only struck out 9% of the time against left-handed pitching. Like you can just use him on both sides as just like a core like cash game option because he's just not going to strike out.
Yeah, he's super cheap on FanDuel. He's 2,900. He's first base there, but also with their new roster construction, it doesn't make it necessary where you have to roster only one. So you can play a Braun and play another first baseman of your choosing if you want.
Yeah, for sure. Like I really like that play over on FanDuel.
San Diego bats against Chase Anderson or Chase Anderson against San Diego. I kind of don't mind Anderson here. Like I do expect a little bit of regression this upcoming year, kind of maybe a little bit more inconsistent, but Anderson was pretty solid. He's still a reverse splits guy. He's actually really tough on lefties. Which kind of makes them interesting here, given the fact that San Diego's added a couple lefties into their lineup.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a guy like he just people might project a little bit of regression for him, but I mean, we're talking about a guy. He's got a really solid 4-pitch mix. He uses it to like really set up batters. He mixes in his off-speed stuff really well. Didn't have a ton of strikeouts last season when he was about 20% strikeout rate, so not terribly great, but he is a solid option, I think, in the spot against a Padres team that has like a ton of strikeouts in that lineup. Like if you just look at their numbers, there's a lot of guys outside of like Hosmer that strike out a ton.
Yeah, there are adding Galvis are not low strikeout guys. Like Hosmer is probably the lower strikeout guy of that team, but that's one batter. I like Anderson. He's definitely a two pitcher site guy. Like I think he's fine as an SP2. I prefer Richards and Cash over him just because you get a little bit more of a discount. But I think Anderson's an interesting GPP play just because I think probably ownership will carry with Richards a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure. And there's only 2 guys in that projected starting lineup with an ISO over 200 against right-handed pitching, and that's that's Will Myers, who also strikes out like 28% of the time, and who's the other guy? Austin Hedges, who strikes out 30% of the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, there's some strikeouts here. Anderson's at a fair price. I don't really like Padres bats. Like Yeah, I'm gonna like Myers at times this year, but probably not in this spot. Just a guy who does have some power and some stolen base upside as well. Like Myers is going to be intriguing. For me, he's going to be such a better fantasy option, I think, over Hosmer.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's move on. Phillies Braves, Julio Teheran versus Aaron Nola. Definitely some interesting notes within this game.
Yeah, I guess we can start on the Aaron Nola side. Like, I think he's going to be a popular tournament pivot here. That being said, like, I know Atlanta's offense sucks. I mean, what, they were 24th in the league last year against right-handed pitching. That being said, like you and I were talking about it, there are not very many strikeouts in that lineup. Like, I don't necessarily think Nola has the upside that people are expecting out of him. I know he had a solid outing, two solid outings, I think, against the Braves last season. But like, it does concern me a little bit, like the expected ownership in tournaments for him and the fact that like there are not a ton of strikeouts in that lineup.
Oh, and everything kind of dropped off on the road for Nola too. Like, fantasy points. He averaged 10 less fantasy points on the road. Yeah, the two games against Atlanta were very solid, but like I don't like picking on this Atlanta team with pitchers. Like, they're gonna probably toss in five lefties here, including Freeman and like Markakis and Inciarte, who don't strike out a ton. You got Albies in there as well. And you look at Nola's numbers against lefties. I mean, 318 WOBA allowed, 4.17 xFIP. Strikeouts dropped down a little bit, 23%. But you caught on to this. The walk rate's extremely high against lefties.
Yeah, and we'll talk about another guy here real soon that walks a lot of lefties. But if you're going to be walking guys, guys that just don't strike out, like they're patient hitters. Like, if you're going to be walking these people, they could actually make you pay. And anytime you have to worry about getting around Freddie Freeman, that's a little bit concerning, especially in that ballpark.
Yeah, I just think for the price, like, there's not enough upside for me. Like, I get it, like, but I'm a big Nola guy too. I don't like him here.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Nola. The overall skill set is solid, and I do like him from like a season long perspective, but not in DFS, not today for me.
No. So with that being said, I mean, Braves bats, like, it's probably just Freeman if I want to take a shot, but I'm probably still looking elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, Freeman's obviously the best option here. He got LASIK in the off season, so he should be able to see a little bit better. So that should help.
He's not going to rock those glasses anymore.
Yeah, the LASIK, you get the LASIK narrative, but he mashed right-handed pitching last season. Obviously, we talked about that park being just outstanding for left-handed power. They literally built it for him. You can roll him out as a one-off if you're stacking this team. I would, Freddie Freeman, Ozzie Albies, great options. Sprinkle in some Ender and Ciarte, who doesn't ever strike out, but doesn't also have very much pop. And then, like, if you wanted to get like a one-off power cheap option, you could look at Preston Tucker, whose numbers are absolutely disgusting, but he should bat, I think, what did they have him projected, about sixth in that lineup against a guy that struggles at times against lefties. I don't necessarily hate him as a one-off.
No, I don't either. So, I mean, Braves are definitely, like, they're in play, but the Philly side is definitely much more appealing here. Teheran is just a guy, like, if you were listing pros and cons, from spring training on, there's a ton of cons.
There's a lot to be concerned about with him. I made the joke in my stacking article that Teheran has not struck out or has not gotten a left-handed batter out since the first Obama administration, and it really does feel like that. 5.08 walks per nine against left-handed hitters, 1.51 home runs per nine, 36% hard contact against left-handed hitters in a park built for left-handed power. His velocity in spring training was down. Some of that, I think, had to do a little bit with him like experimenting with the slider in spring training. So maybe it starts to go up a little bit, but I'm gonna load up on these Phillies lefties today. Like, I absolutely love them, especially like on FanDuel, where Odubel Herrera and Nick Williams are like 2,200 and 2K. Yeah, they're pretty close to locks for me over there. And then Carlos Santana is supposed to bat up in the 2-hole. He was excellent against left-handed or against righties last season. 214 ISO, 359 weighted on base percentage, 368. Wow, I messed that up. 359 weighted WOBA. There we go. and 368 on base percentage. So I love Carlos Santana in this spot.
I do too. I mean, those names that you rattled off here, like Phillies are definitely stackable. Like Cesar Hernandez is going to lead off, like solid, always a solid cash game guy at a fair price. I might look at Scope just for a little bit more, just because of kind of the price point, but I don't mind him here still in this spot. Like if you're stacking, obviously Rhys Hoskins is going to be a guy that we're going to have a lot of interest in as the season goes on. Definitely like Santana over him today, but I will not rule him out as a contrarian option, especially if Tehran gets beaten up early.
Yeah, you could even use like Hoskins and Santana together over on FanDuel. You can
and DraftKings,
yeah, because multi-positional ability. So I don't necessarily mind that. Like I mentioned, Nick Williams, dude does strike out a ton 28% of the time, but he had a 205 ISO against right-handed pitching. I do like him a little bit. JP Crawford, interesting, cheap shortstop option, and whichever catcher gets in the lineup, I think Jorge Alfaro is projected to start. 77 plate appearances last season against right-handed pitching, 444 WOBA, 264 ISO, and a 416 on-base percentage. Like I know Tehran does strike out righties a decent amount, but he's a cheap catcher option that I really do like if you're stacking Phillies.
Yeah, I do too. And one thing to note, Tehran, after kind of being a home pitcher type guy on the past with Turner Field, that completely flipped last year. Over a 5 ERA at home, over a 5 ERA over 4 starts against this Phillies team. I think he's in for big trouble here.
Yeah, Phillies. I mentioned they made it in my stacking article. People just hate the Phillies. People just hate on the Phillies. They never play them. I think they come in at like a super, super, super low ownership.
Yeah, I do too. Washington, Cincinnati, a little bit of weather in this game to keep an eye on, but we're going to leave that to you because we're not weathermen.
Yeah, there is a little bit of weather to be concerned about. We're just going to have to wait and see. I mean, we're recording this on Wednesday morning, closer to first pitch, maybe keep an eye on it. But generally speaking, I don't worry too much about weather, especially on opening day on afternoon games, because they can just wait it out. Sometimes it spells disaster for starting pitchers, but like outside of Max Scherzer, like I don't think you were looking at anyone else. You definitely weren't looking at Homer Bailey, and even Scherzer is not a guy that I have that much interest in today.
Yeah, it's weird. Like Scherzer's kind of the odd man out here. They obviously had one start against Cincinnati last year was very solid. I'm probably going to see a wait and see approach with Scherzer here coming into the year. Probably going to use him in an easier spot in a better ballpark, just given the fact that Scherzer did kind of give up some home runs last year, especially to lefties, which is I guess a little bit concerning here with like guys like Votto and Scooter Gennett and Schebler. Like this still is a decent Reds lineup.
Yeah, there's some decent bats in this lineup. Like I won't rule Scherzer out if I'm building a bunch of lineups, but like if cash games are just one GPP lineup, he's going to be the odd man out. Like I feel like there's a spot where Scherzer comes out, strikes out 10 hitters, but also gives up like 3 solo shots, which is like a very Scherzer-esque line because it generally seemed like he did that every game last year. He'd strike out like double-digit batters, but give up a couple dongs. So you mentioned Votto, not great against the Nationals last season, but he's a guy that if you're wanting to be a little contrarian, obviously one of the better hitters in baseball, never strikes out, very solid plate discipline. Scooter, interesting. Scott Schebler, interesting. I think Schebler had a very solid, I don't have it up, but I think Schebler actually had a very solid spring.
Let's see. No, I don't have it.
Let me look and see real quick while you're talking about the Nationals, I guess.
Yeah, we'll talk Nationals here. And Homer Bailey coming off a very rough year. 356 WOBA to lefties. Came up a ton of hard contact. Really did struggle against righties as well. I mean, he is the worst on the slate in terms of WOBA allowed. Give 1.35 home runs per 9. In this ballpark against this Nationals team, I mean, obviously you're expecting the Washington Bats to kind of go off here. And getting Eaton back healthy, I think, is obviously going to be a huge thing. And if Rendon and Zimmerman can kind of carry over what they did against right-handers last year, it'll be very impressive to see what this lineup can churn out. And then obviously you have Trey Turner and Bryce Harper. And I think Turner's the guy that I'm looking to get a ton of exposure to. I know Carlos Correa is obviously right there, but I really like Turner in this spot here against Bailey, who has power upside in this ballpark and in this matchup, and also has the stolen base upside as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Turner's one of your better options at shortstop, with Correa being there as well. I think the Nationals will be another popular stack. Obviously, you put them in a good ballpark against a terrible pitcher in Homer Bailey, and that's a recipe for disaster. So you can start with Turner. And obviously, Harper is good at baseball, or so I've heard. Adam Eaton leading off is solid. I mean, he's a guy gets on base, 415 on base last year, 163 ISO. So you're not necessarily looking at him to get to hit a home run or anything. But if he's getting on base and someone like Harper behind him is knocking him in, like that's gonna be solid for you. So I like that. I mentioned Zimmerman. He's supposed to be good to go for opening day, but keep an eye on that news just in case. I don't necessarily hate Rendon at a 203 ISO against righties last year, and even Howie Kendrick, who's gonna get the start at second with Daniel Murphy sidelined. He's a very viable mid-range second base option today.
Yeah, definitely don't mind it. I will say, go F off, Matt Wieters. I don't like you, man.
I hate Matt Wieters so much.
I can't stand the guy. And we've named several cheap catchers options, and I'm glad we have because I don't want to mention Matt Wieters.
Yeah, I won't be going there. But now that we said that, he's probably gonna hit 2 home runs.
Double dog for Wieters there. Let's move on here. White Sox and Royals. Last game of the DraftKings main slate. Shields, Duffy. I think at first glance people were like, "Oh man, let's get some exposure to these pitchers," and then everyone was like, "Oh my god, what are we doing?" But I think Duffy might still be somewhat popular.
Yeah, I think a lot of projection systems are going to like Duffy, and I mean the dude has some excellent strikeout potential in this matchup. That being said, the White Sox kind of beat him up last season, and I think both of those came late in the season, whenever his velocity was starting to trend down. But I don't know, I don't necessarily like either one of these pitchers. I will say James Shields much better early in the season than he is in the middle of the season, and there's not a lot of scary hitters in that Royals lineup. It's cheap. He's someone that I will probably actually have in a tournament lineup or two. But I'm definitely not looking at Duffy. I think he's going to be a popular cash game option, but I'd rather go with Richards because this White Sox lineup last season against left-handed pitching only struck out 21% of the time, and they were the 9th best offense in baseball against lefties last season. They were really good against lefties, and even though it's a good ballpark, I still think there's a lot of potential for them to blow up here.
Yeah, I looking at Duffy, loading up a ton of right-handed bats against him. I'm not acting like Duffy was even good against righties. 329 WOBA, 4.65 xFIP. I mean, average strikeout rate, average walk rate. He's a fly ball pitcher. Obviously, you mentioned the ballpark. Yes, that does help. But oh boy, what?
The Reds Nationals opening day game has been postponed from Thursday to Friday due to expected inclement weather.
Well, are the Nationals running the show there, or Cincinnati? Oh, all right. Well, that.
So we're gonna get a Friday doubleheader.
Oh God.
So
Tyreek Evans is probably out tonight too. Oh man. Well, all right. Glad I got to go back in and change stuff there, but I mean that takes a pretty major offense away.
Yeah, that's gonna move ownership basically all over to the Astros and Yankees.
Yeah, that's something to note. I guess let's talk bats from this Royals White Sox side. We'll start with the White Sox here. You mentioned a couple of these names here that or the team overall really solid against lefties, and I love me some Jose Abreu. He was just a guy that no one played last year, and he's a model of consistency. And I get he doesn't have a lot of appeal as a 2 home run guy, but dude mashes a ton of doubles. He will hit probably 30 home runs again this year. Give me some of Abreu at these prices here again.
I really like Abreu here. 428 WOBA, freaking 402 on base percentage, a 275 ISO against lefties last season. He's a great way to start. Avisail Garcia, excellent hitter as well against lefties. I mean, 434 WOBA, not a lot of pop, but he gets on base, 454 on base percentage. I like starting out with those two. Beef, Wellington Castillo, excellent catcher option here. He was outstanding against lefties. He did strike out a ton, almost 28%, but a lot of pop in that bat. And Nicky Delmonico burst on the scene late last season, lefty on lefty. Like, the dude mashes lefties, 226 ISO, 388 WOBA, only 20% strikeout rate. He's expected to be good to go for opening day, but keep an eye on the news just in case. I think he's had some like hamstring tightness, but should be fine. I like those four guys there. And Matt Davidson is someone else that is a little bit interesting. He's going to strike out a ton, but probably drive in, at least one home run against Duffy here. He's freaking 205 ISO. I think he's projected to bat cleanup too.
Yeah, he is. At least that's what I've seen majority.
Yeah, so that's a little bit interesting. He's first base, third base eligible on DraftKings.
And Delmonico, I mean, if you're building like a bitching names lineup, like you got to go Delmonico.
Yeah. So. Now there are two beefs in that lineup now.
That's true.
There you go. So because Delmonico is a type of is a cut of beef as well.
Let's get a Kobe in there.
There we go. We need some Kobe.
Royal side of things here. Obviously, this is a lineup that's expected to take a pretty big step backwards. I still think there's some interesting options here against Shields. Like, you look at Shields. I mean, obviously, his struggles came against left-handed bats, the home runs especially. Like, looking at guys like Moustakas here, obviously, who landed with Kansas City late, Lucas Duda, I don't think they're the worst cheap GPP options in the world at, like, single-digit ownership.
No, I don't think so either. Like, obviously, Duda, excellent against right-handed pitching last season. 298 ISO, 342 on-base percentage. Did strike out about 25% of the time, but you can use him. Moustakas has a little bit of pop as well. Even Salvador Perez, someone that has a little bit of pop in his bat against righties. And John Jay, I think, projected to lead off, is a very viable value option. He's 3,300 on DraftKings. I know he's cheap on FanDuel too, so he's a very, very solid option if you're wanting to kind of stack the Royals, which I don't know why you would, but
if you're building like, I don't know, a bunch of lineups, like a Moose Perez Duda stack is not bad. Like, Merrifield, I'm still probably going other ways, but Jay's viable here. A Royal stack, I mean, if you're paying up at pitching a ton, like, go for it.
Hey, and you do have Alcides Escobar 6 for 14 with 3 extra base hits against Shields.
Oh boy, bat him lead off. Dive into the FanDuel like last 3 games there on their main slate. We start with the Dodgers Giants, who took a pretty big turn with Bumgarner being out. Obviously, that pushes like a pretty easy win for Kershaw. And you and I were talking about Kershaw here. Still prefer Sale for the strikeout upside. Like, looking at this Giants team, they've added a couple more right-handed bats that are decent against lefties. Jackson, Longoria, McCutchen, in addition to like Posey and Pence. San Francisco, like, yeah, the offense may not be exciting, but this is just a team that's not going to allow a ton of upside.
Yeah, I mean, it's Kershaw, so like there's really nothing that needs to be said about him. That being said, like, I don't have his logs against the Giants up, but like there's only 2 players in that Giants starting lineup that are that had strikeout rates over 20%. So, I mean, limiting strikeouts there could hurt Kershaw's upside. If you want to use him, feel free. It's like the Harden and Westbrook conundrum from NBA DFS. So I'm leaning Sale just because I think the strikeout upside is higher, but Kershaw is still an excellent option there.
Yeah, it definitely is. I won't be really taking any bats against Kershaw here. Like, McCutchen crushed lefties last year. Posey has some decent stats against him, but no thanks.
You mean you don't want McCutchen's 9 for 27 with a homer against Kershaw?
I mean, McCutchen, like, if I was taking McCutchen, like, or if I was taking anyone from the Giants, it would definitely be McCutchen. But you mentioned the Phillies price tags, and then we're going to get to the Dodgers, who their price tags are super cheap for a couple lefty mashers. So,
yeah. I mean, I completely agree. I like to joke about EVP.
Yeah. Let's talk about this Dodgers side against Ty Block here, who does not miss bats at all. 350 Woba to right-handers last year. Struggled on the road as expected with the majority of these Giants pitchers. And then we're getting a Dodgers team that's just has a lot of righty bats that have really solid numbers against lefties, and they're just super cheap.
Yeah, I think the Dodgers on FanDuel are going to be a popular stack, especially now. They're basically priced down because they were projected, or because Bumgarner was supposed to start, and now we all know he's not. So, Kike Hernandez is going to be a very popular bat to target here. He obviously has 309 ISO against left-handed pitching. The biggest concern there is when the Dodgers knock Ty Bleck. I'm going to call him Bleck because his numbers are disgusting. Out of the game early, like Hernandez is going to get pulled. Yeah. So he's just a platoon guy. So like I would rather have Nick Williams or Odubel Herrera in that spot for pretty much the same price. But you can get Corey Seager. I think he's 100% now. Logan Forsythe, Austin Barnes, Cody Bellinger, Chris Taylor, all these guys are solid options to look at here from the Dodgers side of this game.
Yeah, I like Taylor a lot here. Should be leading off 188 ISO against Southpaws last year, 122 WRC plus. Yeah, should be looking at a lot of kind of guys that pop. Hernandez is basically like a miniature Scott Van Slyke from the last few years for Dodgers.
Oh yeah, good old Van Slyke.
And Hernandez would have been in play against Bumgarner if you're talking BVP.
Oh yeah, buddy.
But you mentioned like the lefties there, like with Seager, Bellinger. I definitely don't mind him just because like I don't expect him to last long in this start. And Seager and Bellinger, I mean, both can hit lefties. Like I'm okay with it. And should see probably Austin Barnes as well. I see Grandal projected now, but Barnes should be in the lineup against the lefty. He mashed lefties last year. Obviously, a solid offensive catcher. 40.5% hard contact rate. 2,200 as a catcher on FanDuel. I get that the position's gone, but I'm all aboard. Like first base isn't that strong of a position for opening day.
Yeah, if he gets in the lineup, I'm all about it. It could be they could just roll Grandal because he's like Kershaw's little pocket catcher, so that'd be something to keep an eye on. But if he gets in the lineup, I think he's a fine option. We probably won't know ahead of time, so you may want to obviously you get late swap. So like you may want to leave a couple hundred on the board just in case you need to move around with a catcher from one of the other games that lock afterwards. But
a good Ionetta is same price.
Yeah, I was going to say Ionetta is the same price, and Grandal's only 100 more. So,
yeah, you have options. Alex Avila too is 2,300.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely viable. Dodgers obviously going to be a great stack, going to be a great team to target, but ownership will follow. Cleveland, Seattle next year. Corey Kluber, Felix Hernandez. Kluber's kind of like how I view Scherzer. If you're looking at this slate, like. I don't mind him like in a GPP for building a ton of lineups, but still like I prefer sale at a price. Like I prefer going other options. A Seattle lineup I like it. Like I like the Seattle lineup quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the ownership's going to be like on the DraftKings late slate for Kluber. I think he may garner a little bit of ownership. There are like 4 guys with the strikeout rate above 20% in that projected Seattle lineup. Didn't change a ton from last year, and their lineup was pretty solid. I don't necessarily mind him. I mean, it's still Kluber. He still has some nasty stuff, and he's still 34% strikeout rate. So I don't mind him in tournaments, but I'm still leaning other places in cash, and I still prefer like the sales and some of these other guys that we've talked about.
Yeah, and like I'm not targeting sealed bats. Like if I'm taking bats from this game, it's probably going to be with the Indians, but I'm really not high on this game as a whole. Obviously, Felix Hernandez is kind of a guy who's been trending downwards for some time now, so I don't mind taking some shots against Hernandez. But they're probably going to be one-offs for me. I guess if you want to stack Indians, like it's a contrarian stack if you're building a ton of lineups, just because Hernandez velocity's down. This is a guy who's been injured for quite a bit here. Was injured over spring training. I'm surprised he's even starting opening day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Indians are always a very, very interesting stack, and Felix is only going to pitch about 85 pitches in the opener, so he's going to be a little bit limited. I do really like Edwin Encarnacion in the spot. He was really solid against right-handed pitching, has some solid numbers against Felix Hernandez. I I'd love stacking the Indians pretty much any night, and even in this ballpark. Like I know it's not a great ballpark, but there's still a ton of power in that lineup with Jose Ramirez and E5, and even guys like Lindor have a little bit of pop. You're going to get some Yonder Alonso in there, and he's a very interesting option as well. Who he kind of broke out late the first half of last year, I think, with the A's, and he's only 2,500 over on FanDuel.
Yeah, you get that. You got a fan favorite in Lonnie Chisenhall that we cracked the lineup there. He's 2,100. Yeah, I don't mind some of these bats. Like that back half is basically all bare min.
Yeah, there's a lot of cheap bats in that lineup.
Yeah, it's definitely look at the Indians. They're definitely contract. They'll probably grow on me more as the day goes on and into tomorrow on this slate. Especially now with the Nationals bats, I can feel like I can take some chances elsewhere. So yeah, definitely Indians good play. Last game of the night, Colorado, Arizona, Patrick Corbin versus John Gray. I like John Gray here. This is the point where I'm excited to blow the humidor out of proportion. In like I'm gonna troll like when someone hits a homer, like it's fun to talk about here. The humidor has been such a big offseason topic.
Yeah, obviously it is something that needs to be talked about. There are projections that have like home runs decreasing anywhere from like 37 to 50% at Chase Field. When they put the humidor in Colorado, they dropped about 22%. If that's the case, that's going to put a huge damper on these offenses, and it's going to make these some of the pitchers on a nightly basis very, very viable. And it's going to hurt guys like Jake Lamb, who is basically all power and nothing else. And it's going to hurt a couple other guys. So if you want to hope that the humidor effect is in full effect and it's like a 50% decrease in home runs, I'm all about some John Gray, who has nasty strikeout stuff. I read that he was working on incorporating his curveball a little bit more, also tossing his slider a little bit more. Was working on his approach a little bit in spring training as well, and actually finished off really strongly. He allowed 5 hits, struck out 11 in 9 1/3 scoreless innings over his past 2 outings. Decent spot here against the Diamondbacks, I think.
Yeah, I definitely don't mind some grain GPPs. He was pretty decent against lefties last year. Like, and you kind of look like you're going to get some David Peralta, Jake Lamb, Alex Avila, like Kettle Marte, Jared Dyson. And as I read off these names, I'm realizing that Arizona might be a horrible power team this year.
Yeah, they very well could be. Like, there's 2 guys in that lineup with ISOs over 200 against right-handed pitching, and that's Lamb and Goldie.
Yeah, like, and I know obviously Avila like crushed righties, but like very small sample size. Avila is not like a huge hitting catcher. Man, I like him, but and like Peralta, I mean, hits like 55% of the balls into the ground.
Yeah, and like Avila against righties, like he did have a little bit of pop, 191 ISO, but he also struck out 34% of the time. So that's like a free strikeout every 3 at bats. So yeah, and now they got rid of Yasmani Tomas, who was someone that was a decent hitter. He's out of there now. I don't know. Like I think there's some strikeouts in this lineup.
Yeah, I do too. I like Ray. Like, and Vegas is kind of baking in projections to be kind of a regular Chase Field game. So I don't think people are going to jump on Gray. I definitely don't think people are going to be looking at Corbin. But like Colorado does strike out, but they have some lefty mashers, and a couple of these guys have some decent history against Corbin, like LeMahieu and Story. I have all the interest in the world at Story. Like if I'm not paying up, like I know he strikes out a ton, but I like him here. There's so much power against lefties.
And Corbin had a really bad spring training. He gave up 6 earned runs in 11 innings, walked 5, struck out 8. There's even if you do expect homers to dip, I mean, you're still talking about Arenado and Story, who have a ton of power. You even have Chris Iannetta in there, who has a decent amount of power. Charlie Blackmon, decent amount of power for a guy lefty on lefty. Even Pat Valleca is a guy that has a ton of pop in his bat. So there's still a lot of power in this lineup, and I think they could get to Corbin here. Like there's going to be spots where you want to get your exposure to the Diamondbacks pitchers, and that's probably going to be on Friday's slate. But yeah, I think especially on the late slate, I think a Rocky stack is definitely in play.
Yeah, I do too. And obviously, when you look at like Arenado against lefties last year, yeah, like his numbers are just obviously insane. 420 ISO, 534 WOBA against Southpaws last year. I mean, Corbin allowed 20 home runs to right-handed bats, and obviously, maybe that drops down a little bit, but Corbin can still allow the long ball. And like Arenado and Story, like I don't worry about their power a ton here in this spot.
No, I really don't either. And even Chris Iannetta, I mean, cheap value catcher, he still has a ton of power too, and he's not a guy that I necessarily worry about it too much.
No, I don't either. Revenge game too.
Yeah, I was gonna say he kind of knows Corbin, so it's always beneficial to take some of these catchers against guys that they caught.
That's true.
They do know their tendencies. So
yeah, very true. We saw that at Tyler Flowers, I think, a couple times against Sale.
Yeah.
So that's it. A lengthy opening day pod. These will get a little bit shorter, but a lot to cover. And of course, we wasted our breath on a game that was postponed. But 2 homers from you. Who do you got? Give me a maybe a popular option, a contrarian option.
Popular. Stanton. Contrarian would be Mancini.
Like that's popular for me. I'm gonna go. Maybe not. He won't be popular like a huge, but George Springer. And then I'm gonna look at. I'm going to go Domingo Santana as my contrarian option.
Bingo na bingo.
So that's it for us. You can check out dailyfantasycafe.com. Optimizer up and running. Still things being adjusted for opening day. You got the stacking article up already. Pitching pulse is up as well. So everything good to go. But, of course, adjustments will be made throughout first pitch tomorrow.
Good luck.